A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, God. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to give me my share of the inheritance." Jesus replied, "My friend, who has set me up as your judge or arbiter?" Then Jesus told the crowd, "Avoid greed in all its forms. Your life is not made more secure by what you own, even when you have more than you need." Jesus then told them a parable in these words. There was once a rich farmer who had a good harvest. "What will I do?" the farmer mused. "I have no place to store my harvest. I know. I will put down my grain bins and build larger ones. All my grain and goods will go there. Then I will say to myself, you have blessings in reserve for many years to come. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to the farmer, "You fool. This very night, your life will be required of you. To whom will all your accumulated wealth go?" This is the way it works with people who accumulate riches for themselves, but are not rich in God. The good news of salvation. Good evening. This summer, we are working through several sections from the Gospel of Luke that explore the emptiness of materialism and the renunciation of worldly possessions. Tonight is the parable of the rich fool. We opened with a debate about inheritance. In the time of Jesus, the law was that the eldest son got double the portion of every other son. But Jesus doesn't take the bait from the disgruntled younger brother who wants his fair share, because Jesus knows the real problem is greed. Jesus warns, "Be wary and guard against all greed, because one's life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions." Greed is not only a terrible thing, it is also a terrible English word if we are trying to get to the essence of what Jesus is saying. And yes, here we go again, Danny and ancient Greek. Buckle your seatbelts. Our modern English word Greek traces back to the old Saxon Norse word gradag. And thank you, James Osborne, for your Norse ancestors. Gradag is a metaphor for an inordinate appetite for food or drink, along the lines of a rapacious, ravenous appetite. We have different metaphors in Greek than in Old Norse. Luke had 4 different words in ancient Greek he could have used when he was writing the story of Jesus down. And yes, Jesus originally spoke Aramaic. We have no idea which of the 6 Aramaic Greek words Jesus might have used. Nevertheless, it is very revealing which Greek word Luke puts in Jesus's mouth. And this gives us some really profound insight into what Jesus and the first Christians were thinking, even though what we're really looking at here is Luke's act of translation. Luke passed over adiphagatos, which is the closest cognate to our English word for greed, which is the sort of out of control appetite. Luke passed over aplastos, which means being unfilled. He even passed over philagairos, which is the corrupt love of money, which he would use later for the Pharisees. Luke puts the rarest and most philosophical greed word available in Jesus's mouth, pleonexia. Is the right response to me. Okay, that was also probably the response of the readers of the first gospel, who were totally caught off guard by pleonexia. Pleonexia is built from two smaller Greek words, to have and more. So pleonexia is about this drive to have more, and not knowing the line to stop at. What is enough? How do we know when we have enough? When do you decide you don't need more? That debate was just as alive in the ancient world as it was today. And ancient Greek philosophers used pleonexia to explore that fine line between hoarding too much and letting go. So it's really a surprise to see Jesus using this $1 million word in the Gospel of Luke. And he explores it with this parable of the rich fool. As we read, an affluent farmer gets a windfall crop, and he can't store all of it in his barn. So he decides to build a bigger barn. Isn't this common sense? Windfalls don't happen every year. Isn't this prudent to be physically conservative in today's terms, to plan ahead? But God comes and calls him a fool. Interestingly enough, this is the only parable in the Gospels in which God is an actor. The rich fool didn't share his abundance. So God shows up and says, your time is up. You're dying. One nuance in the way that Jesus tells the story in the ancient Greek is the rich fool didn't really earn his bounty. The literal Greek of verse 16 reads, the land of a certain rich man yielded well. So when Jesus is telling the story, he's actually emphasizing that this man lucked out. It was a fluke that he got a good harvest, and he didn't share it. All right. After the section we read tonight, Jesus gets weird, okay? And he goes on a tirade about ravens. Verse 24, consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor weep. They have neither storehouses nor granary, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable are you than the birds? Now, the Catholic lectionary has never, ever had anyone read the raven quote from verse 24 from the pulpit before. But I actually really like this point because ravens are incapable of agriculture. They can't save anything. They have to trust that with hard work and ingenuity, they're going to be able to eat tomorrow. Now, of course, we don't want to look towards the future with rose-tinted glasses and reckless wishful thinking. But I do think that Jesus, in the parable of the rich fool, is suggesting that a realistic view of the future is being generous with our surplus and trusting that with hard work, there will be enough tomorrow. It reminds me of when I go for broke to do a good deed. And I don't have money for a few days, but I know that my paycheck is coming and I've planned ahead so that I know I have enough to eat and pay my bills. Jesus is not advocating for recklessness with money, but he is suggesting that hoarding in the barn instead of sharing is foolish. Jesus is critiquing fear. Under the guise of being fiscally prudent, we can actually become miserly, parsimonious, Scrooge-like, or stingy. All right, there's one more obscure layer I want to unpack. Okay, so did you catch the reference to the man dying in the middle of the night and the eat, drink, and be merry? So for the ears of the first audience of the Gospel of Luke, this would have been a clear allusion to the book of Ecclesiastes, which Jim read earlier. Ecclesiastes is the weirdest, most existential and contradictory book of the entire Old Testament. I just got you interested, right? And that's why our lectionary picked out the passage from Ecclesiastes for our first reading. In the time of Queen Elizabeth I and King James, the famous opening lines of this eccentric book were rendered as vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Are you surprised to learn that that's a terrible rendering of the Hebrew? That's why when Jim read a little bit earlier, our inclusive lectionary took a little bit of a different route. Everything is futile. Everything is just an illusion. But what's really going on here is we have an unusual Hebrew figure of speech, havel, which is impossible to translate. This is the Hebrew niche word, wait for it, for the flimsy vapor that you exhale on a cold evening that quickly dissipates into the air. So when Robert Adler, who is widely regarded as the greatest living scholar of Hebrew, and he taught for many years at UC Berkeley, when he translated the opening to his Ecclesiastes, he translated merest breath, all is mere breath. We don't have a good English word for that little cloud you exhale on a cold day that quickly disappears. But the point that the cryptic author of Kohelet is trying to make is that so much of the ups and downs of our life soon disappear like vapor. Now, in sections that are, again, not normally read aloud in Catholic churches because they're frankly too bizarre, Kohelet discusses the brevity of life, the futility of life, and how none of us really know how long we have. I know, very light. The reason why I'm going here is it's actually clear to scholars that Jesus in the parable of the rich fool is referring to Ecclesiastes with the death that comes too soon to the rich fool. Now, despite the existentialism, Ecclesiastes has a paradoxical message that we would be wise to eat, drink, and be merry and enjoy life while we have it, and to try to get some kind of joy despite the vapors and the breath and everything being so ephemeral. This is where it gets a twist here. Jesus is actually criticizing this advice in Ecclesiastes. How many of us, in the name of having a good time, eating, drinking, and making merry, end up being greedy? Remember, the rich fool justified his hoarding so that he could eat, drink, and be merry for a long time. So with this Greek word, pleonexia, Jesus is trying to articulate a kind of greed that misses the mark, in that this Greek word, it's like a philosophical misunderstanding of what is enough. And that's actually a word in Greek, to philosophically misunderstand what is enough. Isn't that deep? There's no English word for this word. Now, Paul actually uses this word pleonexia in the letter to the Colossians, which is why we read it tonight. So sometimes all three readings actually have like a synergy. Now, and I'm almost done. When David Bentley Hart, who is a major Eastern Orthodox theologian, when he translated this passage that Brian read, he actually used the word acquisitiveness for pleonexia. And if you heard Brian read, remember when Paul said greed is a form of idolatry? What Paul is actually saying is that pleonexia, so this like wanting more stuff, that's actually idolatry. Because you're making the stuff God instead of God. And so Paul is trying to advise the early Christians to focus on heavenly things instead. How are we sharing our surplus this week? How are we being generous? Are we sharing, or are we hoarding like the rich fool? And are we clear about what is enough in our life? And if we have enough, are we sharing the surplus? In a weird twist, I'm actually going to give the last word to Lao Tzu. He has a pithy expression that actually works in English because, let's be honest, what Paul and Jesus and Luke and Ecclesiastes have going on is not really working in English. So here's a pithy ending. And this is from the Tao Te Ching. The one who knows that enough is enough will always have enough. I'm going to say it again. The one who knows that enough is enough will always have enough. Amen.